I know words. I have the best words.
And I'm planning on making it the best and the finest building in the city, maybe the country, in the world.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We're here with another movie review, and Hayden, welcome. It is
Thank you.
the greatest movie, the best movie. Many are saying. I'm hearing.
Right.
It is The Apprentice. None of those greatest best reviews are coming from Donald Trump himself. I'm hearing.
No. I don't know if he's seen it yet. I feel like he probably can't help himself and will eventually, and I can't imagine he's a fan.
Oh, he'll totally hate watch this at some point.
I can't wait. I can't wait for the live tweets.
At like midnight, yes. It'll be
In Springfield, they're eating the
he's
dogs.
already sued
the
over it
that
or
came
like
in.
threatened to
They're
sue.
eating
There's
the
been
cats.
cease
They're
and desist and all that
They're
stuff.
eating the pets.
From his camp. So which is on brand for the movie. All that does is like say, yeah, there's a lot of truth in this movie because
Just kind of proves him right.
Yeah, one of the very first lessons he learns from Roy Cohn inside of it, and we'll get to the gist or the overall here in a moment, but one of the very first lessons he learns from Roy Cohn is like sue no matter what, make him prove whatever, and you know,
attack. That's the line.
So anyway, The Apprentice, not to be confused with the Big League Great Amazing TV show from 15, 20 years ago, is a new movie starring Sebastian Stan as Donald Trump himself. And it is very much about his early days. It is the origin story.
Yeah.
And depending on how you see Donald Trump, it is either the origin story of a hero, I guess, if you see it that way, or it is a worthwhile movie to come right after Joker, fully adieu, as origin story of another villain.
And I feel like the movie definitely skews way harder towards the second, way they frame it, for sure. Absolutely.
So it focuses on his relationship with Roy Cohn, who's played by, what's the actor's name again?
Jeremy Strong, who's basically just doing, right? Yes, he's basically just doing his character of Kendall Roy from Secession, but honestly, I think he dials it up a little more here.
I feel like I really enjoyed this character.
Oh, 100%. Yep.
So Cohn was Trump's lawyer early in his career and also his mentor. So there's a lot of truth in this film. Now, the first thing you see on screen is a disclaimer saying, hey, some things are fictionalized here. And some things are. But some of the biggest moments in the film and even the small ones are very much rooted in reality. And the core of this movie is the relationship between these two.
Yeah.
So Cohn has a little bit of backstory for anybody who doesn't know. Got his start as a lawyer as a prosecutor for McCarthy during McCarthyism. And that's like uplifting.
Yeah, right.
Doesn't know, like, you know, we still have McCarthyism people like being highly influential today, which is great. Anyway, Cohn passed away in 1986 from HIV/AIDS, and man, we'll get to it. But the way the Trump character, and there's a lot of truth to it because I actually did some research afterward. Treated him
as a result of that. Yep.
Oh my God, it's like it's a new low even for, you know?
Yeah, I think that's the thing that's so fascinating about this movie is that it really tells a period of Trump's history and Trump's life that I feel like is not much lesser known, right? I mean, even me as someone who's very involved with politics, very involved with the news cycle, like a lot of this information was new to me. And I think it honestly contextualized and made a lot of learning this history and having it, you know, dramatized in this way, I think really contextualizes and makes a lot of sense. Some of why he is the way he is today.
Totally. And you can see the evolution of the Trump character that we know today, right? And anyway, like we'll get through the non-spoiler part of all this. I think the movie is really solid.
Yeah.
I think it is less biased hidden than Reagan. I think that's not to say it's totally down the middle. It's not.
There's a skew. They're very critical
Yeah.
and very satirical as well, I would say. There's a lot of poking fun.
But what I'll say is I think like this film, at least early, really presents Donald Trump as a somewhat sympathetic character. And almost likable. Like if you didn't know better.
And I think that's just down to Sebastian Stan's performance, right? Before we move on to spoilers, the main thing I want to leave people with is like, I feel like the main appeal of this movie is the idea of Sebastian Stan doing a Trump biopic is crazy, right? Because Trump is such a larger than life figure who's been, regardless of how you feel about him, a major part of everyone's lives over the last decade, at least here in the States, right? Constantly hearing about him in the news cycle, living under his administration for 4 years. A lot going on. So I think Sebastian Stan really, really nailed it. And I was worried that this might end up coming off as like an SNL impression type of thing, but it's not. It's
not.
It's really grounded. It's really real. And I feel like you get those typical Trumpisms everyone does in their impressions of him, right? The lips thing, the hand gestures and stuff. But I feel like that happens more and more in the movie as he ends up on television more, becomes more famous, and really adopts essentially the persona of who we know him as today.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the argument that they're trying to make, right? Is that a lot of who he is calculated. And I think that's the most interesting thing is when you see him right at the beginning of the movie when he's really young in the late 70s.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is a quality film. Now, this might not be a super rewatchable movie. That's, user experience, I guess, for that. But your mileage may vary. But we liked it. We came out at an 8 out of 10 on this. So I, just know if you haven't seen it yet,
it's a great movie.
It's worth seeing. And
for sure.
What I'll say before we go into the spoiler territory is one of the biggest reasons I wanted to see this movie in theaters is because, this movie had a really hard time finding a distribution partner in the United States. And it found them very easily overseas, internationally.
Oh, I'm sure they're leaping.
couldn't find one for a long, long time in the United States, and still to this day doesn't have a streaming deal, which is exceptionally rare for a movie that's in theaters already.
Absolutely.
Like, movies have streaming deals by now. The biggest reason for that, it's twofold. One, they're worried about him retaliating if he wins. That's not speculation by me, by the way. That can be found. And two, they're worried about from the fan base, right? And I feel like there's something wrong with that. I don't know. I just don't feel right about that.
What, being scared to make and to distribute art? That's
yes.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
I feel like that shouldn't be a controversial statement in the United States.
For sure. But I think this is such an interesting case because we've had a lot of biopics about historical figures. We've had a lot of biopics about presidents. How we reviewed one earlier this year, right? About Reagan. Yep. But Reagan's been dead for a couple decades at this point, right? Like it was crazy to watch this movie and walk out and be like, this man is running for president. And we'll know if he's going to be president again within a month. Hopefully, knock on wood. I can't deal with if this fucking takes more than a week after election day.
If it takes more than a day, I'm going to be already stressed. And I know it will. But here's the thing. So for some context, I don't know if you remember this, but the movie W came out while George W. Bush was still president.
Okay.
And it wasn't a shitstorm. It was not an endearing portrayal of him. It wasn't like a smear job, if I remember right. Josh Brolin in the title role. But it wasn't a glowing representation of him either. And
it was critical, for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
And it didn't cause all this. There wasn't fear. There wasn't any of this stuff. And you know what? Bush didn't like it. So you know what he did? He just ignored it.
Right.
Which is what most grownups do. in those positions. But anyway, Reagan came out earlier this year, to your point, and I would have the exact same things to say about it, by the way, if anybody tried to keep Reagan from hitting the screen.
Yeah, no, agreed.
So, yeah, I don't know. I have an issue with that. And so I recommend going to see it. It's a good movie on top of it.
It is. And it's important to support things like this. And I think it tells some interesting context in history while still being really engaging. If you're someone who likes political thrillers or likes a prestige dramedy, you're gonna love this. I've heard a lot of comparisons, people saying this feels like an episode of Succession on the big screen, and I couldn't agree more. And that comes with the incredible filmmaking of that show, but also just there's a weird sense of humor to this movie where it's awkwardly tense and uncomfortable. But there's also some satirical moments where it feels satirical, not just of Trump as a person, but also satirical of these whole biopic / origin story movies, where there's a lot of moments in here that almost felt like the absurdity of that Han Solo movie, how it was just like they gave an origin to every thought he's ever had, everything he's ever said or worn. Like it felt like there were moments like that in this movie where like you see where he gets the phrase "Make America Great Again" from, and you see the gears turning in his head, and it's hysterical.
Yep. So that is our non-spoiler portion. Let's jump into spoilers. Okay. So spoilers from here on in. If you haven't seen it, I mean, it's a historical biopic, like, but we're not spoiling anything you can't see in a book or something like that. But I'm glad you brought up the Han Solo example, because when I'm sitting there watching this film, I keep thinking that we're watching the political version of Anakin Skywalker's descent into the dark side.
Right?
Like we were. We're watching all three prequels in at least movie. Episodes 2 and 3.
Going from being the golden boy to really being cutthroat. And by the end of the movie, like, he's really cut ties and burnt bridges with everyone. And they make almost everybody likable or at least sympathetic at some point. The people around him in his life, right? Like
even Roy Cohn.
Yeah, Roy Cohn. He's an asshole, but he's funny and charismatic, right? And Ivana, I feel really bad for, and the way by the end of it, because the way they introduce their romance, it's kind of like, I don't know. I have that same feeling like you said I do watching Revenge of the Sith. Like maybe it'll be different this time, even though I know where we end up. And I think that's the most fascinating thing about it.
Like early in the film, we meet this man who is honestly an insecure, awkward man who just wants to have success and wants to be seen as part of the big league, right?
He's a tryhard, frankly, is right. And I think, and you see the reason for that. I think a lot of it comes from not just societal factors, but his father,
which we kind of knew, right? Anybody who has paid attention
and knows about Fred Trump. But still, I mean, there's a really great line where they're having family dinner and all the siblings are home, and Freddie, right, the youngest brother,
Trump's
I believe,
brother.
right? He's or no, the oldest. Sorry, he's the oldest brother. He's home, and he's got his uniform, his work uniform on, and he's a pilot for a commercial airliner, which to me I think is like a really cool, prestigious, successful job.
Yeah, especially in the early 70s. Like, come on,
and he cusses him out and says his dad does, and like, I'm so embarrassed every time I have to tell people my son is a bus driver with wings.
Yeah, and he's like, I don't even talk about you. Yeah, like, it's so
when they it's devastating.
And you can see Donald learning from each of those interactions. That worth is created by your achievements, right? And by what people think of you and see of you. And even he has this, like, he loves his brother, but he also has disdain for him, right?
Because he brings shame to the family or whatever, right? And for him, it's less about Freddie's career and more about his alcoholism and substance abuse problems.
Early on, the Roy Cohn character comes in, and we learn Cohn's 3 rules that he imparts upon Donald Trump, and those have carried to, even today. Rule number 1, attack, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
At all times. Rule number 2, admit nothing, deny everything.
Mm-hmm.
And rule number 3 is
never admit defeat.
Never admit defeat, always claim victory.
Yep.
So that becomes Trump's mantra, to the point where at the end of the film, and like he repeats that to the ghostwriter.
Yeah. And they're like, right. And they're like, the ghostwriter's like, where did you get that from? He's like, I don't know. I've just always felt that way. And you're like, oh my God, you're
claims him as his. Yep.
You're so shameless and spineless. And I don't know if those rules were actually the thing that were in the book or not. I'm not really familiar with that history, right? I've never read The Art of the Deal. But like, I do think that like, it's such a good way of kind of giving a narratively interesting context for his personality.
Mm-hmm. Early in the relationship between the two, one of the things I found interesting about the Trump character was that, Trump asked a few times, Hayden, like, is this even legal? Like, he's concerned about that. And that feels so removed from, our favorite president.
Right. And that's kind of, I think the movie makes the argument that Roy Cohn and him kind of turned each other into worse versions of themselves, because they were both people who didn't really care about justice, didn't really care about fairness. They just cared about themselves and about making money and living all the luxurious things about being a rich person.
But Cohn at some point realizes that he's lost control of the monster.
Yep.
And he starts to, in the film, show real regret for his role in creating Donald Trump. In real life, he showed regret as well, by the way. If you go and look at his statements and things that he wrote or whatever, interviews, he had real regret over some of it. And I wonder, hey, not much of it, because Cohn at the beginning is very transactional, right? And Trump, we know today, is very transactional. How much of that was because Cohn now wasn't being treated the way he wanted to be treated? And
right. And was essentially abandoned by Trump because he no longer needed him.
Yeah. And because Trump was disgusted by Cohn having HIV or, and then AIDS.
Yeah. And seemingly terrified of it as well.
Oh, yeah.
Of catching it himself and whatever, and just exposure to it.
I don't know how true the doctor scene is where he asks him, can you get it from
a handshake or whatever?
Yeah. But I do know that, from things I've read and seen, those were very common questions in the 80s. So one of the most heartbreaking things for me, and we're kind of moving through, I feel like, story and cast performance at the same time. So,
well, and they're so interlinked.
We'll score them both at the end of this. But one of those heartbreaking things for me is Trump brings Cohn back into his circle after rejecting him in a really like cold-hearted scene where he out on the sidewalk on the street, he just basically dismisses him and tells him to get out of his life, essentially. But then brings him back in, not because he felt that, Hayden. Because he needed him.
Right.
He makes the phone call. And even when Cohn is like deathly ill, he still waits for 2 rings to pick up. I thought that was a nice little touch.
Oh, I didn't even catch that. That's great.
And then Trump like makes a big thing and has him down to Mar-a-Lago with for the birthday and all of that. And then right after that, Cohn passes away, and the next scene is like that whole room being like disinfected and fumigated, essentially. That to me was such a crushing scene. Like,
it was, and the imagery of it, especially, was so intense, especially when you think about it in the context of Trump being actively president when the COVID pandemic started. And wondering how that might have informed his feelings about it and his action or inaction thereof, right? There's so many things I think this movie does where they show you things and in the context of the movie, in the sort of the storyline, right, in the linear narrative, they mean one thing, but knowing the history of it and knowing where things end up, it's like, oh my god. And sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's an eye roll, but I think this is one of the most devastating images in the film, and I think it's probably the moment that's going to stick with people the most because Trump doesn't go to his funeral, and the way that they frame it, I don't know if this is true, but the way they frame it is that while Cohen's funeral is happening, Trump is getting plastic surgery, essentially, right? He's getting liposuction, he's getting his love handles taken out, he's getting
scalp reduction.
Scalp reduction. And they don't shy away from showing that visually. Like, honestly, It is borderline body horror at that point. It was really, really unsettling and visceral the way they showed that off.
It's a really interesting way. It's the filmmaker's way of showing Frankenstein's monster, right? It's like the final step of now the monster's created.
Right.
And running loose, right? And it was, and I think there's one other scene, though, that I want to touch on that's going to have people talking even more. And there is a rape scene in the film.
Yeah.
And it is, I think, the scene that brought on most of the like cease and desist letters and all of that. Now, this scene, according to the director and the filmmakers, was taken out of Ivana's deposition when they were getting divorced. And according to the deposition, the details were much worse than we see in the movie.
God.
So now she recanted all of the accusations in 2015 when he was running for president. And I'm sure there was no money exchange or anything.
Yeah, right. Trump has never, ever paid anyone hush money for sex crimes or just, unsavory sex acts. We're being sarcastic, obviously. Of course that's what happened. And here's the thing. I think sometimes with something so dangerous or so serious and so hard of a topic like that, I think not sensationalizing it, but you know what I mean? Just dramatizing it, visualizing it, making it part of a narrative can be dangerous. But I think, like, I don't have sympathy for the guy in this case when we know by court documents that, like, even if he didn't do it in this particular instance, he has done it to multiple people multiple times.
In the film, what I found interesting was what sent him over the edge. It was being told he was balding.
Yeah.
Because, like, he's so, in that scene, he's very cruel to her. He's just, like, it's almost like giving a performance review at work. He's just very, like, even voice, whatever, like, I'm not attracted to you anymore. And
he's so callous about it. And he gives her reasons. Specific reasons, which is just so nasty. And honestly, like, almost psychopathic or sociopathic, rather, right? Of just not even seeing the other person, not seeing Ivana as a person, not having any empathy over, like, either he didn't understand how that would make her feel, or he was deliberately choosing those words because he knew they would hurt.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little on brand for what we know, kind of. But then she responds in kind. Tells him, you're
getting fat.
You're a lot fatter than you used to be.
You're bald.
You're balding. At one point, it wasn't during the scene, but at one point she tells him his face looks like an orange. That made me laugh.
Oh, yeah.
So, but the balding comment is what, like, makes him snap in the movie. And, he freaks out, throws her to the ground, and, proceeds to assault. And it all started when she gave him, like, a surprise gift called, like, the G-spot.
Yeah. Because she was like, let's spice things up, Donald. Like, let's have good sex. This is seemingly the implication, right? That she was...
Yeah. Not satisfied.
The intimacy was misrelation. But she did it in a way that was very sweet and was like, this will be fun for us to do together and spice things up and rekindle our love and whatever.
Yeah.
She wasn't doing it to be mean.
So I feel like this scene is going to be the one. People who want to hate this movie, right-wing media, etc., they're going to latch onto this scene and be like, "Yep, they try to paint him as a rapist and whatever, and use it to discredit the entire movie." I think people who want to say that he is second coming of Satan himself will also hyper focus on this scene. I haven't read the deposition. Hey, I don't know how accurate it is alongside the details. I do know, according to the filmmaker, the deposition was much, much worse. And that this scene is where the filmmaker really drew the line and said, I will not take this out of the movie because you can't do a movie about Donald Trump without talking about his misogyny. I guess that's fair.
No, I think so too. And I think that's a big part of this movie is in hindsight, right? Once you get to it, like it's him trying to get with Ivana is very transactional as well. Like he's doing these things where he pays for her dinner. Right? He gets her into this club first, and then he pays for her dinner at said club, and then he lets her go and her friends go back to their hotel in his limo, and then he orders her flowers, and he's doing all of these gestures, and it's not getting him affection, it's not getting him her interest, it's not getting him sex, and he seems like not angry about that, but like confused, right? That he's like, well, I'm doing the things. Why aren't you reciprocating? Right? Like I did the, I'm a man. I did this gesture. I paid for this thing for you. You're supposed to be with me now.
And it shows how much he has learned that your worth is determined by how much you have, right? And how powerful you are. Mm-hmm. The one thing he does do that is sort of like a little, endearing is he does the trip to Colorado, which is still awkward, but kind of, romantic-ish. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying. And then like following her down to the car to profess his love, like after he presents her with the prenup.
Yeah.
But even then, they negotiate on the sidewalk, a dollar figure.
She said $100,000 in my account if you want me to stay with you.
Yep. So, yeah, it's all just, yeah. Cast performance. I thought performances were outstanding for the most part, especially from the two
leads.
The two leads in the film.
Yeah, I feel like this is Oscar worthy from both of them.
This movie's totally Oscar bait. I don't know if it's not going to be a Best Picture Oscar bait, but I do feel like performance wise, best actor and best supporting, I feel like it's going to be.
And I think those are deserved. Honestly, I mean, because I think, like I said, Jeremy Strong is great in this as he always is, and basically just does his Secession character, but a little hammy, but it works. And I think Sebastian Stan's portrayal of Trump is so much more nuanced and at times more charismatic than I would like to admit. Like the movie does it when he's younger, especially, and there are moments like his wedding and stuff like there are, and when Trump Tower is complete, like there are moments where you can see his passion, you can see his drive, and you can see that there are people around him that are benefiting from it also. And he makes the argument about people benefiting from it, right? And saying that, like, look, like New York City needs a building like this to convince people that New York City is not dying. New York City is not a cemetery, right? There's reason to come here to develop. And I honestly think, like, obviously he was just saying that to try and get the tax write-offs, right? The tax breaks. But at the same time,
I think he believed in New York City, though.
He did.
A little bit.
He definitely did.
Yeah.
And that shows in the film and in, I think, his actions and in the fact that he only moved away from New York City when he became president.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, he very much stayed in Manhattan for pretty much his whole life.
And now claims that it's the worst place ever and, all this stuff. But I think that's because, this place that he feels like he invested a lot in doesn't want him. And, he doesn't generally react very well to that. So, yeah. Anyway, we gave Story 7.5. I think it's solid.
I do too.
And cast performance is 8.5, really strong.
Oh yeah.
So
best part about the movie for sure. And honestly, I think some of the best acting I've seen in a movie this year.
Yep, I would agree. Look, sound, and feel. I think this movie does a really good job of capturing like 1970s look.
And 80s as well, yeah.
Yeah, early 80s too, towards the end. Yeah,
there's some really fun camera tricks they do where the aspect ratio of this movie kind of is like an older movie or older TV, where it's a little more square, right, than we're used to with modern stuff. But also the cameras have in the 70s this really film grainy look to it. There's a lot of texture. And then in the 80s, you get the texture of the VHS era where you have the kind of video lines, and they're subtle, but they're there. And and I think this movie does a really good job of it teleports around time a lot more than I thought it would, right? Because it takes place over, I would say, about a decade of his life, give or take, right?
Maybe even more, almost 15 years, probably between 10 and 15 for sure.
Yeah, and they do a really good job of showing that, and there's some really fun needle drops as well where, you know, they'll play disco music in the 70s, and then when you get into the 80s after they get married, you have a fun little montage to Blue Monday by New Order, which is just the song everything uses when they want you to know it's the 80s now. Have you noticed that?
Yep. Yes. You know, we saw Maxine earlier this year, which was set in the 80s. And I feel like this film does an even better job of like presenting itself in a way where you like know the time period.
Yep. Yeah, they never have to do a title card where like it's now 1981 or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you kind of just have a general sense of time because of what the movie looks like. And I think that's so smart and so respectful of its audience.
Because Maxine, like for all of its great parts, the production value was very current, right? Like it looked really sharp, but not in a bad way. Like it was fine. But this movie like really leans in to the time period, and I enjoyed that. I like that part of it.
Yeah,
including the aspect ratio
for sure. And I think it makes this movie like I wasn't really thinking of it as how much of a genre film it really is, right? Going into it, obviously I knew it was going to be a biopic, right? Because it's who it's about, but I didn't really think about it as a period piece. And it really is. I think it does a really great job capturing that of the fashion and the clothing and the cars and the cinematography in a way that I think is really impressive and really immersive. And it's especially difficult to do when you're a lot of the time shooting on location.
In New York City. Like I was
in New York City today, and they make it look like New York City in the 70s and 80s. And that was, I think, really impressive.
Yeah, it was really well done. So look, sound, and feel, we gave 7.5. It's really solid. I wouldn't say anything like earth-shattering, groundbreaking, but like it does a really good job of putting you in that period.
Absolutely.
And doesn't do anything to take you out of it. So really strong there. Intangibles, I guess my one knock from an intangible point of view is like, I just don't know how rewatchable this movie is going to be. But the rest of it, I feel like it's going to start conversation. I feel like it's going to age well.
Yep.
I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I think it's a hard movie to see what the legacy of it will be, right? Because it depends on a lot of external factors. It depends on whether or not Trump wins or loses, how he responds therein, and I guess what happens to this movie, right? If someone steps up and is like, we're going to stream this, we're going to get this out there, or if it becomes not lost media, but a bit of a relic, right? Where maybe you got to buy this thing on Blu-ray if you want to watch it or something like that.
Well, what's going to be disappointing is like, if he loses, there's going to be a bidding war over streaming rights on November 6th. And that's going to be really disappointing in my eyes. Like, it's just, I mean, not that the movie's going to have a streaming deal. Good for them. But
no, it should. I think this movie should. I think a lot of people should see this movie.
But
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I'm a big believer in just not giving into it. But I'm with you on the legacy. I don't know, because the story's not done yet. And the story might be years from being done.
Right.
So
Yeah, it's really hard thing it's too early to call, right? To
Yeah.
use some election terminology.
Yeah.
But I do think there are moments of this movie that I think are really important, really impactful. And there are some that are genuinely just really fun to watch as far as the way they're shot and some of the humor of the awkward, ness of him when he's younger, or as far as like there's a lot of wink wink nudge nudge lines that they put in there that are clearly referential to things that have happened in recent history. So I don't know. I think it's one that I think I will definitely rewatch when it comes to streaming at home. But I think also that's just part of me is I think there's a lot of other factors for that beyond the movie itself, right? I think it's just a personal taste thing of I really love Secession. I loved that show, and I don't think anything has captured that energy ever other than this movie. And I don't know. It's a weird vision of the world that's tense and stressful, but I also really like it in a way. Just I like the satire of it. I like the commentary of it, and I think it looks great and has some really fun moments.
I do too. Everyone should get this movie on digital and watch it with the whole family at Thanksgiving.
Could you imagine? That's maybe the worst case scenario. Definitely don't do that. Yeah, right.
So intangibles, we gave 7 out of 10. To sum up here, like, Hayden, would you want to see like this is, clearly the opening of a trilogy. We could get episode 2 focusing on the 90s and into the Apprentice up until, the announcement or coming down the golden escalator as a final shot.
Yeah, honestly,
episode 3
is just the presidency.
Yeah, which fits along with Revenge of the Sith quite nicely.
Honestly, I could go for more. This is a movie for me that as I was watching, there were a couple times where I was like, "Oh, this is heavy," and I don't know. There were times where I felt like I wanted it to be over, but I don't think it was because it was boring or dragging. It was just because it was so heavy. But then by the time we get to the end and it ends where it does, I'm like so invested and so compelled by this version of our world and our events and by this portrayal of the character that I could definitely go for more.
One of my favorite things about storytelling is that it takes real issues we're focusing on in the world and it puts them in another place without characters that we know. So you're able to think about things without like the tribalism and the feeling and all of that. And you obviously can't do that here, right? It's all stuff that you very much know and people so it's like there are going to be people that get angry because they find themselves, especially in the first third to half of the film, almost sympathizing with this character.
Yep.
And they're going to get mad at themselves. And you know what, though? I do think early on, his ambitions and just this need to be seen as, that level.
It's fascinating. And it's kind of relatable.
And it allowed him to be manipulated.
Right.
So you can feel the humanity being stripped away from this character. And that's the point of the film. That's what this movie is. To the point where somehow the person stripping it away from him, Roy Cohn, has more humanity than Trump himself.
By the end of things, yeah. And, you said that obviously a lot of it is history people know, and that's true. But I think focusing on this period in time, I think it's a period of Trump's personal history that's not really talked about a ton and isn't as common knowledge, obviously, as, when he was in the early 2000s and being, in the stratosphere with all his TV shows and everything like that.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think a lot of people Trump was a name, I think, in the 80s with, the whole lifestyles of the rich and famous type of thing. And,
yep. Had a lot of products with his name on them. The Trump steaks.
Yeah, plus the book, right? Came out in 87, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, the Art of the Deal.
And then throughout the 90s, I think the name got tarnished a little bit. Some of the bankruptcies, etc. And then in the aughts, he was really rehabilitated by NBC. They are to blame for all of this. And they put him on The Apprentice, and away we went.
And they put him on SNL during the election cycle.
Yeah, but I think, but Hayden, people then were still convincing themselves that, you know what, if he gets in, it's going to be fine. Like he'll have grown-ups around him and it's just rhetoric and he'll dial it back. And he didn't, like, you know, because everybody that ever came before that we can remember did that.
Yeah.
So I think that's why. I mean, look, Jimmy Kimmel had him on during election time.
Or Fallon.
Or Fallon did.
Kimmel definitely did not.
Kimmel did not. Fallon did, though.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah, I think there was just this idea. Because even, okay, so when he got elected the first time, I even sat there thinking, like, it's not going to be that bad, right? Like, it's definitely not what I voted for.
Right.
But you're going to get
please,
in.
everybody around us make sure this is okay.
Yeah, like,
stop
come on.
him and whatever.
Everybody be grown ups.
Flood the cabinet.
Yeah. Right? And then, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I'm interested to see what the response to this movie is going to be in the big picture. The box office, I don't know if you saw.
I did not actually.
Has not been strong.
That's unfortunate. That's not surprising, though.
It's made $1.5 million so far.
Whoa.
in the first 2 days.
Okay.
It's not on as many screens. It's only on like 1,500 screens.
Yeah, it's a pretty limited release, I feel like.
Which isn't like super limited, but it's also limited, right? So you'd hope that it, you know, did a little better than that, and hopefully some word of mouth will help. But I think what this movie has going against it is the people who love Donald Trump are not going to see this movie.
Nope.
And then the people who don't like him and aren't doing silly things like us reviewing it are just like exhausted.
Yeah.
And they don't want more of it.
Yeah, I feel like it's a really hard movie to find an audience for.
Yeah. And that's why overseas, I think this film will do much better internationally.
Oh, of course.
There's this more like morbid curiosity about it all.
And they're not inundated with him every day like we are in our news cycle. So it's, I don't know.
Yeah. So anyway, our overall score, like we said early on, 8 out of 10. It's good. Like this movie is solid.
It's great. I'd go as far as to call it a great movie.
I think it's going to get some Oscar love, probably in the performances aspect. And I could see it getting some cinematography, maybe.
Yeah. I'm really curious to see what this director does next. I definitely will watch whatever that is.
Me too. So, I'm hesitant to say, let us know what you think about The Apprentice and the comments.
No, go for it. Honestly, it's interesting conversation.
Yeah. Let's all be nice to each other. We said some nice things about the movie and the titular character. Kind of. So, everybody be nice and leave comments, and thanks for, watching the video. Like the video, subscribe to the channel for more movie stuff, movie lists, all those types of things coming down the pike very soon. So
Smile 2 next week, which will be, I imagine, not as serious and potentially not as scary.
In this time of year, it's so weird because right now it's either like Oscar bait or like horror movies.
Like blockbuster horror.
Yep, and that's what we're getting. So anyway,
stoked for it.
Yeah, I am too. I'm looking for. I just watched the first one like a week ago. So
okay, word up.
I'm ready to go. All right, let us know what you think of The Apprentice, and make sure you subscribe for more stuff on new movies and movie lists and all sorts of fun stuff on the channel. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Take care.
I know words. I have the best words.